This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Agun Erev Shabbos, everyone. Welcome. This will be our first year on Pirkei Avos for this season. And we're going to go back to the beginning. Parak Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. The Mishnah tells us that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah basically taught us to do three things. Have a Mesuna Medin, be deliberate in judgment, V'hamidu Talmidim Harbe, V'asu Siyag L'Torah. But we're going to focus on V'ha'amidu Talmidim Harbe. What does it mean you should be ma'amid many Talmidim? Why doesn't it say you should talamed Talmidim Harbe? You should learn with, you should train. What's the lashon of amidu? And secondly, as opposed to what? Well, you would think you should just teach a few people, and the Mishnah needs to come along and say, no, teach a lot of people. So the Bar Tanura says like this. This comes to exclude the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. And Gamliel famously says in Brachos that any student whose inside is not like his outside should not enter the Beis HaMedrash. Right, Rabbi Gamliel would say that unless you're completely genuine and sincere, most people are better on the outside than the inside. Most people, they act better than they really are. So Rabbi Gamliel said, if you're one of those people, you can't come into the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Gamliel had a very selective policy. So as La'afuke, the Shita Rabbi Gamliel said only very genuine people could come in. No, the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, you teach Torah to anybody, you don't have to investigate them. As long as you don't know that they have some kind of kilkul or they have they're of bad repute. Fine. So there's a new Pirkei Avos called Lahoros Nasan, written from Rav Nasan Gestetner. I know of a very of a collector of Svarim on Pirkei Avos, who actually, when I saw his collection on Pirkei Avos, I think this individual, Rabbi Weiss in Los Angeles, wrote an incredible bibliography on all the Svarim ever written on Pirkei Avos, and he told me that one of the most original of the contemporary Svarim on Pirkei Avos is the Lahoros Nasan of Rav Nasan Gestetner. And he asks a very interesting question. The Mishnah is saying over a teaching of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Who was on the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah? Mordechai's association, and Nevi'im, and they say teach Torah to everyone. So who's Rabban Gamliel, who's a Tana, who lived after the Churban Bayesheni, to come along and to contravene the instruction of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, who said teach anybody, and he said no, you can't teach disingenuous people. But we know Ein Divrei Bezdin Yachal Divrei Bezdin Chaveroi. How can Gamliel contravene the instructions of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah? Now, Rav Nasan Gestetner offers the following. The Gemara Brachos tells us that on that day, Oisa Hayom refers to the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed the Nasi, and we know he was 18 years old, and a miracle happened, and 18 rows of white hair grew, and that's what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah meant when he said, I'm 70 years old, but I'm not actually 70 years old. And that day they removed the shomer of the Pesach. What was the shomer doing in the Beis Medrash? The shomer was the one who either allowed or didn't allow Talmidim to come in. Because Rabban Gamliel called out any student whose inside is not like his outside cannot enter the Beis Medrash. So they removed the shomer, and on that day many benches were added. It's a machloikis. Rabbi Yochanan says machloikis Abba Yosef ben Glatstein and the Rabbanan. Some say 400 benches, some say 700 benches. So amazingly, there was actually, see, today they have guards on the grocery stores and they take your temperature to see if you had corona or not. But back in the day, they had guards in the Beis Medrash, and they tested you to see if you were genuine or not. So, here's the question. The question is, it says, one opinion said 400 students were added, and one opinion said 400 benches were added, and one opinion says 700 benches were added. Now I'm looking for my sefer. Here it is, because I think there's something missing on the sheet here. Let me just find it. So the question is that Rav Nosson Glatstein asks, he says, Chad Amar. He asks, how did the guard of the door know which student was sincere or not? He had a sincerometer. He had a genuine-ometer. He had a special barometer to determine the level of sincerity of a student. How in the world would he know who is a genuine student and who's not a genuine student? So, it is on your sheet. It's on the top left-hand side. Okay, I missed that. So Rav Nosson Glatstein says as follows. Rav Nosson Glatstein says, Tanu Rabbanan, based on the Gemara Megillah, it says from the time that Moshe Rabbeinu died until Ram Gamliel, they would only learn Torah standing up. We know Torah has to be learned be'ema, be'yira, be'resas, v'zeya. It has to be learned with the proper respect. And therefore, from the time of Moshe, Torah, and Gamliel, they only learned Torah standing. But from the time that Ram Gamliel died, illness came down to the world and they had to sit. This is what it means from when Ram Gamliel died, Batal Kavod HaTorah. So, Rav Nosson Glatstein, number 7, explains, Limud HaTorah needs to be be'emo v'yira, similar to the way the Torah was given on Har Sinai, like it says in Brachas Chaf Beis, you have to teach your children, your grandchildren, just like the Torah was given be'emo v'yira, so too here. And therefore they learn Torah standing. Now, until Ram Gamliel, that they learned Torah standing, this was the siman that you were Toichai Kabarai. You want to know how the Shomer was able to determine that you were a genuine student? If you were learning Torah standing all day long, with amelos and effort and toil, from dawn until midnight, how would you have such stamina? The only way you could have such stamina is if you were learning the Shem Shamayim. Because if you were learning for any ulterior motive, you would not be able to tolerate the strenuous effort needed to learn Torah. Like the Rambam says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Divrei Torah, it will not be preserved by those who learn out of delicacy and eating and drinking. Only somebody who kills themselves over it. And this person who learned the Amida, standing and strain themselves and doesn't give sleep to their eyes, there's no doubt that they're learning Torah Lishma and Toichai Kabaroi. So the Shomer HaPesach, he didn't have to look in your heart, he just had to look in the Beis Medrash. When they saw a student sitting in the Beis Medrash, he didn't let him come in. He's obviously not learning L'Shem Shamayim. So until Ram Gamliel, everyone learned standing. And that's how we knew Toichai Kabaroi. But when Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah took over the office, they removed the Shomer HaPesach and they gave Rishus to the Talmidim to enter. And they were not makbid to learn standing anymore. Anyone who learned with Yigiyah had permission to enter. And that's why they added benches. It doesn't say how many students entered. Because only students, even in the time of Rebbe Eliezer, only students who were Toichem Kabaram were allowed to enter. Now, the students who were Toichem Kabaram, they were allowed to enter from before. Now we only added those who were on the Madrega who were Toichem Kabaram but could not stand, and therefore many benches were added. Because until then they didn't need to add benches because everyone learned standing, and those who learned Lishma did not need benches. But once they gave permission for students to enter, even those who were not miyageh lishma, they had to add benches. In other words, from the time of Elazar ben Azariah, they had to add benches because now they allowed to enter even those who were not standing. Now, it's very interesting. It says v'ha'amidu talmidim harbe. Why v'ha'amidu? So the Tosfos Yom Tov says, it says a lashon amida because sometimes a Moshe term Gamliel they would learn standing, and the Rebbe would sit on a chair. Now listen to this. It says the Lahalayos Nasan number 9. This siman of standing is only from the time of the Anshe Knesset Agdoila, who said v'hamidu talmidim harbe. Now, so listen to this. Before the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, they didn't let every Talmud come in. They didn't give rishus to anyone who could stand to come in. They actually checked your actions, and they checked your personality. Who was a Talmud Hagon? So before Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, they did a high-level Jerisha v'Chakira. From the time of Anshe Knesset Hagdoila and on, there was a Yeridas Hadoros, and they said, V'ha'amidu talmidim harbe. You don't have to investigate, you don't have to search, but anybody who's able to hack the standing could come in. But you did need to know that someone's Tach Kabarai if you learned standing. And that's what Ram Gamliel was noyeg. He only allowed people to stand. When they removed Ram Gamliel, they were mavatar on the siman of standing, and they gave rishus to anybody. So Ram Gamliel was not arguing on the takana of the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, who said v'ha'amidu talmidim harbe. They both agree. Meaning, Ram Gamliel maintained the restriction of Anshe Knesset Hagdoila of v'ha'amidu talmidim harbe. Ram Gamliel said, but they have to be standing. So here's what happened. Before Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, they did a full cross-examination. After Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, they had to be standing. Gamliel maintained that. So, because even the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila agreed that it has to be Teicha Kabarai. And this is what it means, Hamidu Talmidei Harbe. So it comes out, says Rav Nosson Glatstein. Now I will say, this is not like the Bar Tanura, because the Bar Tanura says the Hamidu Talmidim Harbe is La'afuke Ram Gamliel. And Rav Nosson Glatstein is saying, no, the Hamidu Talmidim Harbe was exactly what Rav Gamliel demanded. But according to Rav Nosson Glatstein, there are 3 periods of Jewish history. Until Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, they really investigated. From Anshe Knesset until Rav Gamliel, they didn't check person's maisim, only standing. And from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah on, anyone could enter even if they were sitting. Says Rav Nosson Glatstein, this would explain a Medrash in Parshas Pinchas. The Medrash says that when the Bnei Tzlafchad inherited their father, Moshe said, if the daughters of Tzlafchad inherited their father, I am going to claim my needs. Because if daughters could yarshin, my son should yarshin me. So Hashem said to Moshe, daughters yarshin bedin. Hashem said to Moshe, no, noitzer te'eno yochal perya. He who guards the fig tree will eat its fruits. Your sons were sitting and they were not oisik b'Torah. Yehoshua served you very greatly. He gave you a lot of kavod. He woke up early. He stayed up late. He arranged the benches. He spread out the mats. Since he served you, he should serve the Jewish people. So the question, what is the chashivos that Yehoshua arranged the benches and spread out the mats? Says Rav Nosson Glatstein, from the times of Moshe until Ram Gamliel, they stood. But they stood on mats. From the times of Gamliel, they sat on benches. Yeshua ben Nun arranged the benches and spread out the mats. What does that mean? The kavana is he brought into the Beis Medrash both the Talmidim that were Toichan Kabaran, who were able to learn standing, and even the Talmidim who were Toichan Kabaran. In other words, Yeshua brought benches into the Beis Medrash because He allowed in even those who sat on the benches. And Hashem, who saw unto the end of all generations, saw the time would come that there will not be always students that they could learn standing and they'll have to sit on benches. And he said, Yeshua will inherit you. He will teach Torah to Klal Yisrael. Because Yeshua is Makar of the Talmidim who learn Torah sitting. So I'm not sure what he means, because the Gemara does say that from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until Gamliel, they only learned standing. So I'm not sure what these benches were for. But the bottom line is, the way he answers the question, that Rabbi Gamliel is not arguing on the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila. Rabbi Gamliel agrees with Hamidu Talmidim Harbe. It's just Rabbi Gamliel said you don't need to cross-examine. Any Talmud who's standing could enter. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah opened up further that they'll allow in even the students that are sitting. Okay, Rabbi said we'll hold it over here. Wishing everyone a great Shabbos.
All participants are muted.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.